Alright, man. I'm gonna do another quick one real fast. Last video I sent to you, I had briefly touched on spinner baits, buzz baits, stuff like that. What I did not say is when is a good time to use a spinner bait? How do you decide if it's a good time to use a spinner bait? So, everybody has different opinions on it, but basically what I'm just going to do through these videos, man, is I'm going to tell you how I do it. I mean, if you find another way that works for you, then do it, man. Get on it. With spinner baits, the way I do it is, like I said before, I prefer to use a spinning cast when I'm using spinner baits. It seems like a lot more work for me whenever I'm using my bait caster. Plus, spinning cast it's much easier to basically control the speed of your bait, or just a lot of different reasons. I'm more comfortable with spinning baits or buzz baits on my spinning cast. But I mean, whatever you want to do, dude. So anyway, how do you decide when to use a spinning bait? My personal preference for spinning bait is, one, it needs to be warmer water. The fish need to be pretty active to go after something really flashy that's moving through the water fast, because first of all, they have to chase it down. Second, if it's if a fish is lethargic, or in a waterway that's low oxygen content, has low dissolved oxygen content in the water, the fish may not be as active. So you may have to slow it down. Change your presentation. They may not be have enough energy or desire to go after something that's really bright, flashy, and moving through the water. Spinning baits generally, what you're trying to replicate or make it look like is bait fish. Some kind of a flashy, smaller, fast-moving fish going through the water that gets attention. So whenever I'm using spinners or buzz baits, is the way I'll usually do it is if I'm right on the edge of a grass line or something like that. Like, say you're standing on the bank and there's a little inlet next to you or something like that, and there's a grass line that comes from the bank all the way out halfway across this little inlet. You're at the edge of the grass line. Well, that's a perfect time for a spinner bait. Throw it out along out the edge of the grass line, pull it down, bring it back to you, along the grass line. These baits are big, they're bulky, they have a lot of moving components and points and stuff on them, so they will snag really easy. So you really need clear, relatively open water. But a lot of large bass will set up an ambush, at the edge of a grass line. They'll hang out underneath the grass in the shadow. As a fish swims past the edge of the grass in the sunlight, they'll dart out from underneath the grass and get the bait. That is a perfect time to use a spinner bait. Pull it along a grass line, a weed line, structure content, just right along the edge of it. If there's anything hanging out in there that's deciding that they like it, they'll shoot out, grab it real quick, and boom, you got yourself a fish. Then you got buzz baits. Buzz bait is a very noisy, makes a lot of ruckus. This is a top water bait. You would tie your line on here. You can use a Palomar. It's pretty effective right there. As you throw it out, you immediately need to start retrieving this. You don't want this to sink. What happens is this piece right here goes just below the edge of the water, and this little helicopter looking thing right here will be right on the break between the top of the water and underneath the water, and it'll splash around as it goes right across the top of the water. Makes a lot of noise, gets a lot of attention. Fish will dart up, get it, thinking that it's something swimming across the top of the water, and got yourself another fish. So that's how I decide when I'm going to use these. I mean, a buzz bait, you can throw it out there anytime you want. As long as this portion of it's not dragging through the grass or sticks or weeds or something like that as you're going through the water, you're good. So what I wanted to show you with this video is a rig that I learned about a long time ago. I don't know what the real name is for it, but I was told it is called a punch shot. It's I think that every bass fisher needs to know this rig, punch shot. So what this is used for is, say you're fishing from an elevated position, like a boat. You're in your boat, or you're on, you know, standing on top of a log. It's a little bit above the water, and there's grass layer everywhere. You know, like say there's a moss layer on the top of the water that's a couple inches thick, or you have, you know, when I was in Georgia, there's a lot of floating grass mats, you know, things like that, or foil plants, milfoils, things like that. Stuff that's, you know, clumpy, organic material, you know, plants that grow in the water, but they're at the surface. So what happens a lot is these, you know, vegetation layers will float up to the top, and then you have just, you know, this much area of the top of the water that's completely closed off because it's all vegetation. Underneath it's deep water. You know, there may be vertical structure, horizontal structure, rock overhangs, stuff down below that where fish are hanging out. And some of them are pretty big fish. So the purpose of this rig is to punch right through that vegetation layer. You know, get through it, get down, and what happens is when you break through that layer, you have a big flashy bright bait, you know, punching through there, and as it gets through the layer, fish see it come through and immediately go after it, you know. So hence the punch rig. So all right, so basically here it is. I got a hook tied up to a main line, same way I've been showing you for the last few videos, and I'm going to put a worm on there. You know, got a nice plum colored, you know, a lot of action in this tail. You want this rig to stand out and be flashy, but it also has to be streamlined because you're going through a vegetation layer, man. You don't want to take that vegetation down with you, because then the fish aren't going to go after it. So I'm going to put this worm on this hook. I'm going to show you how to do this setup. I use this rig a lot. Most of the time, mostly when I used it the most, you know, that sounds weird, huh? Anyway, when I used this rig the most was fishing from boats. You know, you pull up into an inlet or a cove or something like that, and you got a big vegetation layer there. A lot of potential for fish. You don't want to, you know, let that spot get away from you. Could be trophy fish in there, or, you know, biggest catch of your life, something like that, you know. Anyway, so we got the worm rig just like before, and you can use offset hooks on this too, because you know, depending on how offset your hook is, you know, they have like U-turn hooks, J-turn hooks. This portion of it may bend around a lot, so you know, it'll compress the size of that profile and reduce amount of areas for vegetation to hang up. So anyway, that's the worm on the main line tied to it. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do with this, remember I told you, you want it to be flashy. You want it to stand out. You want it to get a lot of attention. So this is one of the situations where the skirts I told you about come into play. See that skirt? Big, flashy, glittery. Light hits it. You know, it twinkles as it goes through the water. This has a lot of movement to it, you know. And you got that. All right. So with a punch rig, you need to have, you know, it needs to be able to punch. You know, a gram isn't going to punch. You know, 2 grams isn't going to punch. You need something push right through that vegetation, force its way through. So what I do is, you know, after I get the skirt and everything put on the worm rig, just like that, you want heavy weight, you know, good size weight. This is called an egg weight, or punch weight. This one is steel. There's different materials you can get. There's tungsten, you can get lead, you know, whatever. You can double stack these up. You know, you get a tungsten and a steel one together, stack them up. As you work those, you know, a little bit of movement, clink, 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 noise, you know, it's all attention getters, man. So experiment with it, do whatever you want. This here's a 3/4 ounce egg weight. If you look at it, you see one side is a little bit more pointed than the other. So the way you're going to set that up is just like I said before, pointy end. When you're doing a rig like these, it's always going to go towards your pole. So we'll go ahead and throw that on there. Ooh, that was noisy, huh? Alright, so see that? So it's a fairly large rig, heavy rig, you know. You want something that packs a punch. If you're not getting through the weed line with this, one, the weed line may be too thick or too dense for you to get through. It may not work out the way you want it to, so you may have to abandon this plan. But you could always try heavier weight. Get it through there. Boom, punch in there. Then one thing you don't want when you're punching through vegetation is you don't want movement. You don't want this. You don't want that weight sliding up and down like a Ned's rig or Carolina or Texas. Okay, so what I do is I stake it. I briefly covered this before, but the center pin or the centering hole on this weight is extremely large, and my toothpicks don't stake properly on it. So what I do in that situation, a little bead, it's rounded, deflects stuff, less likely to snag. Throw that on your main line, run it all the way down to the weight. Just like that. See that weight, that bead on there? Just like that. Alright, so then once you have a bead on there, the hole in the center of the bead is much smaller, so you can do things like, I save money every chance I get, man, and I'm not buying rubber stakes that cost $5 for 10 of them. That's just ridiculous. You can get an entire box of toothpicks, 20, 30 cents, whatever. Do whatever you want to do, but toothpicks, for me, best stakes in the world. So anyway, take the toothpick. You're going to want to push this stuff all the way down. Pull it tight. Take that toothpick with the line already through the bead. Push that toothpick down in there, and boop, it'll no longer slide. See that? It doesn't slide up and down anymore. Then what you'll do, you don't want that toothpick poking around out there, sticking up, hanging up on stuff. So I just take my line and make sure you don't cut your main line, because if you spend all this time setting up this rig and cut your main line, it sucks. Everybody's done it. You're probably going to do it too. I've done it a million times, especially, 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm tired. Just got to the water. Tie up my rig and then clip the wrong, not the tag, the main line, Got to start over. So anyway, I'll pull my line down to the side, hold it with my fingers, grab the weight. Then you just take your clippers, push it down to the top of the bead, cut it off. Punch rig. Punch through that vegetation. Get it down there. Once it gets through the vegetation, gets the attention of the fish, you got them. Sometimes you got to use a little finesse, or be careful, when you're retrieving these fish out of this stuff, because if there is, tree vegetation down there in that too, you don't want your lines wrapping around this stuff. You want it to be able to, cut through the vegetation on the top of the water and get the fish out of there as quick as you can. If fish swims around the side of a log or a branch or something like that, you're going to lose it, unless your line is really strong and you're able to pull them back around that log or stick or whatever the case may be. But generally, whenever a fish wraps your line around something, you've lost that fish. And I generally try to retrieve as quickly as I can. And you don't want to go crazy ripping the side of the fish's head off or something like that, but the faster you retrieve, or as fast as you can retrieve, the less likely you're going to be to have major issues, line stretching, chafing on the side of a rock, something like that. You lose a big fish like that, but sometimes you hook a big fish, you weren't planning on hooking a fish that large, so your gear may not be heavy duty enough to be retrieving a fish like that. So you're gonna have to tone it down, loosen up that drag, let that fish spool you a little bit, wear them out, then bring them in. But you'll figure all these things out as you go. So punch rig, remember that. My opinion is that every bass fisher needs to know this rig. This is how you get through the vegetation. This is how you get to the fish that are underneath there. There may be 12, 13 pound bass hanging out down there, hiding out, ambushing fish and bluegill and stuff as they swim past the shadows and light. Fish that big will change your life, man. So there you go. That's how you do it. Later.